Hey guys, my name's Pocket and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about LeeSin. LeeSin is of course an incredibly popular champion and is really not hard to see why if you've ever played him. There's so much about LeeSin that makes him an incredibly rewarding champion, and in this guide I'm going to talk about everything from the absolute basics that you need to know before you pick up Lee for the first time, all the way up to some niche tips, tricks, and of course combos that are really going to get you on your way to mastering LeeSin. As usual, I'm going to put timestamps in the video description, and if you've got any questions, sling a comment down below and I'll try and get back to you. So let's start off by talking about LeeSin's abilities. LeeSin's abilities on their own are not the most complex abilities in the world, but because of the fact that he effectively has 6 basic abilities, a passive and an ult, it's really important that you understand exactly how all of them work so that you can know exactly what you are capable of as LeeSin. So firstly, his passive is Flurry. After casting an ability, LeeSin's next 2 basic attacks within 3 seconds gain 40% attack speed and restore energy. Now, the recasts of your basic abilities do count as a separate ability cast, meaning that weaving auto attacks between recasts of the same ability can be a great way to make sure that you've got great energy conservation. This is something that we're going to talk about much more in depth in the clears and the combo section, but definitely keep it in mind for now. LeeSin's Q is his skill shot. It fires out a sonic wave in the target direction, and it will collide with the first enemy minion, monster, or champion that it hits. Once marked, you'll be given vision of the unit, and a huge circle is going to appear around you as LeeSin. This is the range for your second cast of the Q. When you recast it, you're going to fly towards the enemy, and you're going to deal the same amount of damage as the initial Q hit, except this is actually execute damage. For those of you who are newer to League, an execute damaging ability is something that scales with the missing health of the enemy champion. In this case, it's exactly 1-to-1. So for every 1% missing health on the enemy, you will do 1% more damage. This is really simple, but it's something to definitely think about. And once again, we're going to talk about this a bit more in the clears section and in the combo section. Something to be aware of when you are recasting your Q is that you will track with an enemy if they use a dash or a blink or somehow reposition, and this can lead to some pretty unpredictable reactions, especially with flash. So just be prepared to turn up in a different location right on top of an enemy that's dashed out, because it can be a little disorientating when you're first picking up LeeSin and then suddenly you're over a wall. LeeSin's W is another mobility ability. You will dash to an allied unit, excluding structures, which is really important, so you can't dash back to your tower, but of course you can dash to wards and minions and champions. If the unit that you dash to is a champion, you're both going to be granted a shield. Upon recast, you will cast Iron Will, which grants LeeSin bonus lifesteal and spell vamp for 4 seconds. An important thing to note about your W is that it can be self-cast, which is very helpful in the jungle when you're clearing, and we're going to talk about that in the clears section. LeeSin's E is an untargeted ability. When cast, he smashes the ground around him in a big circle, and if he does manage to hit anybody with this, then they're going to be marked for 4 seconds. This mark will reveal the enemies, meaning that you are granted vision of them if they run into a bush or something, and if you recast your E within 3 seconds, then you're going to slow all marked enemies for 4 seconds, but this slow decays over the course of that 4 seconds. Now, of these abilities, your Q is your staple, and it's going to be the ability that you max first, just simply to get the extra damage and the lower cooldown on this really important ability. Then you're going to max W in order to get that extra lifesteal, and then finally you'll max E. And in the jungle, you're going to start W, Q, and then E, but that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in the clear section again. And then of course, finally, after these effectively 6 basic abilities, you have your ult. LeeSin's ult is Dragon Rage, and he roots the target enemy for the entire cast time of this ability, and then once it's been fully cast, he will kick them away from him. Basically, it's going to draw a line between you and them and kick them exactly down that direction. They'll be in the air for 1 full second, and if they manage to collide with any other enemies, they're going to be knocked up for 1 second and dealt damage that scales with the primary target's bonus health. That is the bonus health of whoever you kicked. Of course, we're going to get into much more depth about how to use these abilities, how to combine these abilities, and all of the things that you're going to be able to accomplish with LeeSin. But it is really important just to understand every single one of them separately, because it's going to give you a better ability to choose on the fly which abilities and which combos you want to pull off based on your current situation. Now let's talk about your first clear and your jungle pathing on LeeSin. So Lee has a pretty healthy clear. The self shield from your W and the lifesteal from the recast of your W mean that you're not struggling to sustain in the jungle much. This gives Lee a really good ability to choose any path that he really wants to, but the core initial path for LeeSin is to start off at the red buff. It doesn't matter if that's on top lane, it doesn't even matter if the top laner doesn't leash you. When you start W, you should have no problem clearing red buff. Just make sure that you are dragging that buff back and kiting it as best you can, and then we're going to immediately fly over to the blue buff. At this point you're going to take your Q, and once again you're just going to kite that blue buff as best you can before moving to Gromp. At this stage you should have cleared pretty quickly and you are level 3. Level 3 is a big power spike for LeeSin, and at that stage I'm going to be looking for ganks. You should be looking towards both the side lanes and the mid lane. Obviously you have pretty good gank potential on LeeSin and you're now stronger than most laners, so it's definitely preferable to look for a gank at this stage. And because you're choosing to do this kind of free camp half clear before going for a gank, it means you should have ample time to gank and fight before you have to move down and contest the scuttle. If however, for whatever reason, you don't think that there is a gank opportunity available to you, what you need to do is simply turn around and perform what they call a reverse clear. That is when you simply go straight to wolves and then chickens, which you'd skipped in the first clear, and depending on how fast you've managed to clear, you might even do Krogs too, and then contest the opposing scuttle. It's a really awesome thing that LeeSin can do this half free camp clear while still maintaining great gank potential, while also having a healthy reverse clear open to him as well. It means that you can be unpredictable and you've got a lot of choice available to you when you are going out for this first jungle clear. Now, like I said, LeeSin has a pretty healthy clear, but there are a few things that you need to think about. Firstly, it's your passive. It gives you both energy regen and attack speed, so weaving in 2 auto attacks between each use of your abilities. By each use, I mean each single use and not the recast. You can maximize your damage and your clear speed as well as how healthy it is too. So what I'm talking about here is using the first use of your Q, then you auto attack with the increased attack speed, then you use the second use of your Q, then you auto attack before starting with your W. And you rotate around like this in order to get the absolute optimal clear. I suggest doing this with all of your abilities early on, but sometimes you're going to want to save maybe your W or your Q and just rotate with the other 2 if you are scared of somebody invading and thinking that you have to get out. Obviously, if I'm fearful of an invade, I'm not doing very well and I'm playing from behind, which is pretty tough on LeeSin in the first place. I do like to keep my W so I can ward hop away, but if I'm doing well and I think that they might invade because they're simply stupid, I might keep my Q so that I can engage on them the moment I see them and shut them down really easily. Next, we're going to talk about LeeSin's rune sets. Now, there are a number of choices that you're going to need to make in the item section, which we'll talk about next, but no matter what you decide to play in the item section, you should pretty much always take the same keystone on LeeSin, and that is Conqueror. Conqueror stacks really easily on LeeSin because of your auto attack weaving between double uses of your abilities, and it grants you both lifesteal and AD. Now, LeeSin has fantastic AD scalings. In fact, the lowest AD scaling is on his Q, which has a 100% AD scaling. So being granted survivability through lifesteal, which is really nice when you're flying into the enemy team right in the thick of it, as well as being granted substantially more damage because of your awesome AD scalings. It's just the best rune set that you're going to have available to you on LeeSin. At max stacks and level 18, Conqueror is giving you 36 AD, as well as 9% Omnivamp. For a keystone, this is substantial, especially on LeeSin. Like I said, ahead because he can stack it really easily, so this is the keystone for you. Obviously, when we're taking Conqueror, we have access to the Precision tree, and on line 1 in every game, we're going to take Triumph. Triumph offers us two things. Firstly, when you get a kill or an assist, you're going to heal 12% of your maximum health back. This is really awesome for survivability. Like we've talked about, LeeSin has to get up in the thick of it, and it can be quite a dangerous situation, but because of your high damage and your high burst, you'll often be picking up a kill pretty quickly, and that healing really does matter. And secondly, Triumph offers you an extra 20 gold on kills or assists. Now, LeeSin is an early game champion. He doesn't drop off nearly as badly as people tend to suggest, especially if you go for a more versatile build, but it's undeniable that he has early game power spikes because of his awesome gank potential and solid abilities, so that extra gold early on is really helpful to help you get ahead and help you snowball. On line 2, we're going to have a choice. That choice is between Legend Alacrity and Legend Tenacity. Alacrity offers you attack speed, and it's great for helping you clear and helping you deal more damage, but Tenacity offers you, well, tenacity, so it's great when the enemy has a lot of CC, and if you want to become a little more tanky and a little more versatile. The way that I would pick between these is simply, are you expecting to go for an Eclipse damage build or a more bruiser-orientated Gore Drinker build? We're going to talk about this much more in the next section on items, so just keep this choice in mind. And then on line 3, we have an almost identical choice between Coup de Grace and Last Stand. Coup de Grace is your damage option. It's great with Eclipse. Obviously, it deals more damage to low HP enemies, so it's great to synergize with your Q, which is an execute, but Last Stand gives you that damage when you really need it, so when you're playing a more bruiser fighter type playstyle, alongside the huge healing that you can get from Gore Drinker, it's going to offer you a lot more in that playstyle. So once again, if you're going for the Eclipse, go for Coup de Grace, and if you're going for Gore Drinker, go for Last Stand. Now for LeeSin's secondaries. In most games, I'm going to opt to go into the Inspiration tree, and here I'm going to take Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight. Magical Footwear is really awesome because the boots are free, so it saves you a bit of money and helps you save up and get ahead earlier on. The boots don't spawn in until 12 minutes, but that's reduced by 45 seconds for each kill or assist that you get before that. So because you have a very high early game presence as LeeSin, it means that you're probably going to get them substantially earlier than 12 minutes. And then when you do get them, they're going to have an extra 10 movement speed. Because he is a melee champion with a huge amount of mobility, movement speed can be super useful, and this is just an overall great rune. But the real reason that I love the Inspiration tree on LeeSin, and in fact most junglers, is access to Cosmic Insight. Cosmic Insight offers you a massive 18 summoner spell haste. This means that you have your flash up more often, and most importantly, you have your smite up more often. I find this super useful at any level, and it just gives you better control of your clears, your pathing, and your objectives. These are the secondaries that I will take every single time that I go Eclipse LeeSin, but if you decide to go Gore Drinker LeeSin, you can opt for a different set of secondaries. Now my personal preference is still the Inspiration tree because I love that Cosmic Insight on junglers right now, but going into the Resolve secondary tree and selecting Bone Plating and Revitalize is really awesome. When you are playing this more resilient fighter style LeeSin and you're getting healing from your W and from Conqueror, and obviously the huge amount of healing from your active on Gore Drinker, Revitalize is awesome. It also offers you a little bit better shielding from your W for both you and your allies, which is nice. And of course, Revitalize has double the effect when you're low HP, so it synergizes nicely with Last Stand as well. That being said, this is going to be a preference thing. Like I said, I personally like to go into the Inspiration tree, and most of the higher level LeeSin players that I've talked to and watched are also going into this Inspiration tree, but there's a significant amount opting for Revitalize and the Resolve tree, so definitely try it out and have a go yourself. And then finally, for the Rune Shards on every single build, we're going to take Attack Speed to help with clear, then Adaptive Force to give you more damage, and then Armor once again to help with clear. And now we're going to talk about the build choices that you have available to you on LeeSin. The two core choices that you're going to be making, as I've alluded to in the rune section, are between Eclipse and Gore Drinker. Basically, Eclipse is your damage heavy, burst heavy option. It's obviously going to be better for carrying on your own because it gives you this ability to snowball out of control and become very powerful in yourself. It's excellent for 1v1s. Like I said, it provides you with substantially more damage, but it also has that Omnivamp, as well as that passive shield on top of the sustain. And currently, this is my go-to item on LeeSin in solo queue. I think that the agency and the personal ability to snowball and become a very powerful team member is much more important in solo queue than it is in pro play or even in Clash, where you have much more coordinated teams. So for that reason, I would suggest at the moment to go Eclipse on LeeSin in solo queue, at least in most games. With all that being said, Gore Drinker is definitely a choice that you should consider. It is better when you have more coordination, but if you have a duo queue that does a lot of damage in his champion pool, you can think about going for this Gore Drinker build. You bring a lot more utility to the team simply because you can take extended team fights and play as a bit more of a fighter and even get quite tanky, especially into the later game where you're going into your final items. If you go and look at the stat sites for League, I know that these sites are notoriously a little iffy to say the least, but it's at least interesting to look at this. On sites tracking normal solo queue players of any rank, Eclipse is always the highest build rate and highest win rate, but on the sites that only track the solo queue accounts of pro players, you're going to see substantially more Gore Drinkers. And as I said, I think this is simply because pros are practicing to play in a completely different realm to solo queue, where they have exceptionally skilled and coordinated teammates, meaning that they are able to drop that agency of a full carry snowballing LeeSin in favor of a more utility focused, bruisery playstyle LeeSin. That isn't to say you're going to be useless at all, and it certainly isn't to say that you're not going to be doing a significant amount of damage. At the end of the day, you still are LeeSin. You still have those great AD ratios, and you still are building AD items. We're just talking about going from a pure damage, almost glass cannon LeeSin that you have when you play Eclipse, and you don't build any items that give you any resilience until at least item 3, versus the Gore Drinker build where you're immediately going into a more sustained and extended fight type playstyle. So I know this has been a little dense again. Hopefully it's given you a good look at what your choices are on LeeSin and how you can make them in solo queue. To summarize, in my personal opinion, you should be going Eclipse in most of your solo games, but if the enemy have hard counterpicked you, if you're simply not confident going into the matchup, or if you're in a very coordinated team, in both of these scenarios you're talking about being able to drop some of your own agency and some of your own influence in favor of that utility, this is when you should be looking towards Gore Drinker. So now let's start off by talking about what items you're actually going to build on Eclipse LeeSin. Of course, to start, we'll always be taking Red Smite item and moving immediately onto Eclipse. I like to start off with Serrated Dirk. I don't really feel the need for the sustain of Vamp Scepter because I have a very healthy clear on LeeSin, and Serrated Dirk is a really nice power spike. Once we've built Eclipse, we're almost certainly going to have boots even with magical footwear, because if you've built Eclipse very early because you've got a bunch of kills, they will have spawned sooner, and if you've got no kills and they're spawning right at that 12 minutes, then more than likely you haven't built Eclipse yet. Our boot choices are extremely versatile. The core damage option is Ionian Boots of Lucidity, also known as cooldown boots. These are just the best damage option on LeeSin, giving you more use of your high damage abilities. They also offer some Summoner Spell Haste, which when combined with Cosmic Insight gives you Smite very quickly. These are excellent boots in the jungle, and they're my first choice for boots on LeeSin. That being said, if you are going into a heavy AD team comp or a heavy AP team comp, you can of course look towards the defensive options. This is also true if you're just simply going into a tough AD matchup in the jungle or a tough matchup that has a lot of CC in the jungle. Definitely do look towards these defensive options, but this is going to be up to you to make this choice on the fly based on team comps and how the game is going. After that, we're going to go straight into Edge of Night. Edge of Night is a fantastic item on LeeSin. I think it's thoroughly underrated, especially in the lower elos, and as returning viewers to the channel will know, I play a lot of support, and from an opponent's perspective, this item can be incredibly frustrating to see early on champions like LeeSin, which gives me even more appreciation for it. It's still got a lot of damage, 50 AD, 10 lethality, but it's also giving you some health, and of course that passive spell shield. This has a 40-second cooldown, but of course if you have gone for that Cosmic Insight rune that I did suggest, you will have some item haste to bring this down a little bit. The resilience provided by that health is nice early on because it is a flat health bonus, and the safety provided by that spell shield, especially if you're in the late laning phase or early mid game where you're going to be sneaking up on people a lot more, and you're going to be able to get the drop and gank people. When you have that Edge of Night spell shield, it makes it very hard for them to shut you down. Even if they have excellent reactions, you're going to be blocking the first ability that they throw at you as you come flying into lane. And just overall, there's nothing wasted when you buy this item. After Edge of Night, we have our first choice. This choice will be between Guardian Angel and Sterak's Gauge. I make this choice pretty simply. I'm normally looking towards Sterak's. It's a very versatile item because it's giving you resilience in the form of a very large shield that's being procced automatically. It means that it's almost always the exact same amount of performance, and it's very consistent. Guardian Angel is the more niche item. It's providing actually a little bit less AD, 40 instead of Sterak's 50, though it should be said that GA is 300 gold cheaper, and then rather than that 400 health that Sterak's Gauge offers, Guardian Angel offers 40 armor. Now in my opinion, 40 armor is much better than 400 health, but of course only when you're going into heavy AD team comps. This makes it less versatile when there is a lot of magic damage on the enemy team, but it is somewhat more versatile with its passive. Whereas Sterak's offers you that big shield, Guardian Angel of course offers you a revive. I find this very nice on LeeSin, especially in the Eclipse build, because you're quite squishy, yet to do your job you do have to jump into the thick of it. Sometimes you do simply get burst down long before the rest of your team does, and it can be nice to revive because you'll likely have access to some abilities to help you dash out and survive, or maybe your team has distracted the enemy and started a larger team fight, which you can immediately join in. So basically, if there is a lot of AD damage on the enemy team, I'm looking towards Guardian Angel, but if not, I'm looking towards Sterak's. Now, if you have built GA, I definitely be looking towards Sterak's next, but if you have built Sterak's, I really wouldn't be looking towards GA. Like I said, if there is a lot of AD damage on the enemy team, you should be building GA first. So if you have built Sterak's, GA is probably not going to be that useful as your fourth item, and I would instead be looking towards Black Cleaver. Again, this offers you 40 attack damage and 400 health, so it tends to be good in the same kind of situations and games where Sterak's is good. Also offers you a hefty 25 ability haste, which you should definitely make note of, and it has two passives. One shreds the armor of the enemy. This is nice to pick up on that fourth or maybe fifth item when it's very likely that a lot of the enemy have picked up some armor at this point, and its second passive offers you movement speed after attacking. This is nice on LeeSin, especially as you move into the late game where there's going to be a lot of team fights. Team fights tend to be a bit more extended, meaning that you can't always rely on your abilities to be your primary mode of transport. Basically, you're going to be doing a lot more running around and manual repositioning, so that extra movement speed just helps you get around, helps you dodge skill shots, and stay slippery when you're in a lot of danger. And then for our last item choices, in the GA section, I'm definitely looking towards Death Stance. Once again, this is another armor item, so it tends to synergize well with games in which GA has been a good pick for you. Also offers you 55 AD, which is pretty nice. And once again, this has two passives. 35% of physical damage taken is dealt to you over 3 seconds as a bleed, and when you get a takedown, it removes whatever's remaining in that pool. On top of this, it grants you 30% movement speed, and 10% of your maximum health is restored to you. This restoration comes over 2 seconds, so it's not instant and you should take note of this, but it's still a fantastic item. Into heavy AD team comps, GA plus Death Stance makes you pretty resilient, especially if you've got Sterak's in the mix, while still having built a pretty high damage item composition. And the final item that you can look towards is Ravenous Hydra. This offers a huge 65 AD, as well as 20 ability haste and 10% omnivamp, and of course that AoE on hit or on ability damage, which can once again be a nice addition in the late game and in team fights. It's definitely not an item that you're going to want to be considering towards the start of the game, but I think the longer the game goes, the better this item can be. Really though, I think Death Stance does its job better. It is less damage, so if you really want to go full glass cannon, you're doing really well on your own, or if the enemy really doesn't have any AD on their team, so the physical damage and the armor of Guardian Angel and Death Stance is doing nothing for you, then definitely consider Ravenous Hydra. Now for the Gore Drinker build, it does start off a little different, but as we move into our third, fourth, and fifth items, it's going to be a lot of the same choices as we talked about in the Eclipse build. As you will have noted from that Eclipse build, you do tend to build a bit more resilience later on, simply because it's necessary into team fights rather than ganks. So I am going to gloss over repeating items a little bit here, and if you are skipping through because you just wanted to see the Gore Drinker build, I do apologize, but listen to the Eclipse build and it's going to give you everything you need to know. So for our starter item, once again we're going to go for the Red Smite item, but shockingly enough, we're then going to move into Gore Drinker. Gore Drinker is actually a bit more of an expensive item than Eclipse, and this entire build is actually a little bit more expensive. So for that reason, I like to start off with Iron Spike Whip. Helps with your clear just that little bit, keeping up your farm to keep up your gold. Then I like to go into Phage for the passive, and then finally Kindle Gem before finishing the item. I think this build path is pretty important and I rarely deviate from it. Luckily, both Phage and Kindle Gem start with a Ruby Crystal, so you don't even really need to lose much efficiency by taking this build path exactly every single time. After that, we're going to go into our boots, and we're definitely going to pick a defensive boot choice here. It's a pretty typical choice. If they have a lot of AD, then you're going to want to go for steel plate caps, but if they don't have a lot of AD, or if they just have a significant amount of CC, definitely look towards Merc Treads, because despite being the magic resist boots, really it's that passive that's giving you a lot of tenacity that really makes this item worthwhile. And then after that, we're going to go straight into Sterax. Sterax and Gore Drinker is a huge power spike for you on this build. You become deceptively tanky and resilient, while still having built items that give a fair amount of AD. Like we talked about, you have great AD ratios, so even though this isn't the full damage build, don't underestimate how much damage you still can do with this, and you can do it in a much more dangerous way because of that huge lifeline shield and that huge active healing from Gore Drinker. And then after this, we've got access to pretty much the same 4 items: Guardian Angel, Death Stance, and Black Cleaver as the core choices to finish off this build. If the enemy don't have that much physical damage, start with Black Cleaver into GA. GA is still worthwhile, especially on this build, because of that revive, and they're always going to have some AD on the enemy. It's going to be extremely rare to go into a full magic damage team comp nowadays, so it's not like that armor is completely wasted. Then you can go into Death Stance, but if you really don't want Death Stance, if they really don't have that much physical damage, so you're not going to be getting the most out of the passive, you can instead of course look to Ravenous Hydra. Like I said, I've glossed over these items a little bit. If you have skipped through and you're just here now, do have a look earlier on in the build section where we talked about Eclipse and I explain these items much more in depth. And there we have it, your 2 core build choices on LeeSin and exactly how and why to build them. So now we're going to talk about combos on LeeSin. Of course, this section is not going to be complete. There are so many amazing things that you can do on LeeSin, ranging from very, very basic combos that you're going to need to know, which we will cover, all the way up to a huge number of niche, flashy, and intricate combos. And I'm going to try and touch on them a little bit, but really I'm going to keep this to the absolute must-know LeeSin combos. And we're going to start off in probably a pretty familiar place, because would it really be a LeeSin guide if we didn't mention the Insec? The Insec is named after a former pro player called Insec, who pulled this combo off in a pro game in a really amazing way. And back then, I think it was season 3, it really blew everybody's minds that that was possible in such a high-paced pro game as well, and it's become a staple of LeeSin. So the idea of the Insec is when you're coming in with your Q onto an enemy that you want to pick off, you will place a ward down behind them and then ward hop to it, all while you're in your Q, meaning you appear behind them really instantaneously, and then of course you hit them with your ult, pushing them away from their team into the line of fire, and your team can finish them off. It's a really fantastic way to pick somebody off on LeeSin, and it's also something that you are able to practice pretty readily in the practice tool, which is why I really like suggesting this to people. You can just jump in the practice tool and really get this down. But I also want to talk about the Insec in a bit of a different way to how most people will talk about it, because of course most people just see the Insec as one combo. But if you say venture over to Heisman's channel channel, who's a very, very experienced LeeSin player, you'll see videos where he has the this insec and the that insec, all variations on the same style of combo, but with a little bit of a difference. Rather than go over 12 different types of insec that you could pull off, I just want to talk in a more abstract way about positioning to pick somebody off with your ult. LeeSin is extremely mobile, and there are a ton of ways that you can position yourself behind an enemy. It doesn't just have to be this one static insect combo where you're ward hopping. You could hit your Q on a minion or a player that is behind the person that you want to pick off. You can also Q in and then flash behind them and ult them out, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute actually. Or you could ward hop to, say, an ally who's frontline and already behind them. So rather than limiting yourself to just one combo and trying to pull off the perfect insect so that you can mimic insect himself, try to really just think about all of the options that are available to you. This is something that's simply going to come with practice and experience, and try to make the choice for yourself on the fly. And I think you're going to have a much better time than simply trying to force a combo that might not actually be optimal at the time, even if it is flashy and cool. So for those of you who don't know, you can actually ult and then flash on LeeSin. You in fact press R and then you flash almost immediately, and during the time it takes for the flash animation to complete, your ult animation is actually still running, and the result is an almost instantaneous kick as soon as you appear behind the enemy, giving them absolutely no time at all to react. This is another staple combo on LeeSin. It's something that you have to get to grips with, but unlike the insec, which is definitely going to take practice, this is actually really easy. You simply press R and then you press flash as quickly as possible. And of course, the thing that you've got to think about the most with this is flashing in the direction exactly parallel and opposite to the way that you want to kick them. By this, I mean where you appear behind them is going to have an impact on the direction that you kick them. So don't just simply R and then immediately flash, because that will almost always kick them right back from the direction that you were coming. But you might actually want to come off a little bit to the side if you want to kick them exactly into where your team is. Let's say that you are coming in from an angle into a lane. You don't want to simply R flash them without thinking about where you'll appear, because you might kick them back down into the river. By coming in at a little bit of an angle, you'll be able to kick them back up the lane, and then hopefully your laner is going to be able to catch them and shut them down. My absolute favorite use of this mechanic on its own is actually tied in with another tip that I want to talk about, and that is that you can actually kick people from the other side of walls in the jungle. There are a large number of walls in the jungle where this is possible. Some of them are so thick that you might not actually expect yourself to be able to do this. So once again, you might want to hop in the practice tool and really get to grips with where this is possible. But because you can target them over that wall and use your ult all without actually coming over the wall, it means that if you do have vision control and you do have vision of the champion that you want to kick, what you can actually do is target your ult on them, then flash over the wall, kicking them back over the wall and into your jungle or a lane. Because there's obviously going to be a wall in their way, this will put them massively out of position, meaning you can put them very deep into the jungle and your team can come and pick them off. You can simply isolate them and 1v1 them, or you can even use this on lane side walls to kick them under a tower and just take them out that way. And if you hit them with your Q before you kick them over the wall, you can make sure you have the ability to follow them, so no matter where you kick them, if you want to then get straight on top of them and finish them off, you're going to be able to do that very easily by simply recasting Q after or toward the end of their flight. And next, once again, I'm going to talk in a little bit more of an abstract manner rather than a defined combination, but I want to talk about repositioning before you use your Q. Obviously, with the insec, you're repositioning afterwards to really try and take the enemy by surprise, but in this scenario, I'm talking about using, say, a ward hop to put yourself in a better position to hit your Q, because you can't pull off those flashy insect combos if you're not actually able to hit your Q in the first place. So the core thing that I'm thinking about when I am coming in for a gank is that I don't like to be parallel or perpendicular to the enemy that I'm trying to hit with my Q. When you're perpendicular to them, that is, they are running effectively sideways to your line of vision. It's too easy for them to stutter step backwards and make it really difficult for you to hit your Q. Like likewise, if I'm just coming straight down the lane, it's too easy for them to get in a minion wave or simply take that right hand turn and dodge your Q in that way. So in fact, I like to come in at a little bit of an angle. I find that I hit more Qs this way. You might be different. I know there are people that swear by coming straight at them from a parallel line of sight, so there's obviously going to be some preference here, but I've found a really nice angle that I kind of like, and I enjoy it when I can ward hop to that, or even just set myself up there by walking there, especially if they're pushed up deep in the lane and I'm just expecting them to dash backwards. I do have a little bit of time to simply reposition there manually, and then I'm in the best position to hit my Q. At that point, of course, you can then flash ult them to kick them back down the lane as we talked about. If you've positioned manually, you can just simply ward hop and insect them, or if they're low, you can take them out. It's really going to depend on the situation here. But what I want you to take from this little segment is that sometimes it's more important to ensure that you hit your Q than to ensure that you've got the flashiest, most awesome combo lined up. This actually leads on to another thing that I want to talk about, which is actually ulting somebody before you use your Q. Of course, this only really works when you've managed to position yourself on top of the enemy without previously using your Q. But let's say you've come around a corner in the jungle and somebody's trying to invade you, or you've managed to ward hop to an ally who's really in the thick of it. Something that you have to get used to is throwing out your Q onto an enemy that's currently being hit by your ult. It makes it incredibly easy to hit your Q this way. In fact, once you get this down, it becomes undodgeable. Definitely do go and practice this though. Sometimes the enemies can be kicked in a little bit of a different direction to how you expect, so there's definitely still some aiming here. But once you get quick enough at aiming onto an enemy that is flying away in your ult, then your Q will hit them before they have any chance to dodge it, which makes this a really, really powerful combo. And the other advice that I can give you in this section is that when you are trying to pull off a combo like an insect combo, really try to make sure that you don't just spam your W when you're trying to do a clutch ward hop. If you can get used to just pressing W once, you're going to have your second use of your W up, meaning you can weave in a couple of auto attacks before using your W again, renewing that attack speed and ensuring that you get the most amount of energy given back to you before you use energy again. Spamming W might make it easier when you're less experienced at these combos, but it's actually a pretty bad habit that ends up with wasted energy and wasted auto attack damage. And we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this has been helpful on your road to mastering LeeSin. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I'll try and get back to everybody. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel because we've got loads more guides coming out soon.